I'm Michael Dobbs, Lord Dobbs of Wiley, but perhaps better known as the creator of House of Cards. But there's competition out there. My dear friend David Amos has just published his memoirs. And since he's been in the political business now as a member of Parliament, almost 40 years, I think it's about time that he told us all about it. And he's done it gloriously in his book, his new book, Eyes and Ears. And he's going to be discussing that this evening with two of his parliamentary colleagues. It's a fabulous book. It's reflections of an extraordinary life as a great campaigner, a man who worked with Margaret Thatcher all those years ago and has been campaigning ever since on Brexit and on so many other issues. So the book is wonderful. David is fabulous, and you're going to have a great evening. I hope that you will enjoy both the book and this evening. Thank you.
Next month, a book which I have written called Eyes and Ears, A Survivor's Guide to Westminster, will be published, part of which covers Brexit. And yes, by inference, everyone will be in the book. Would my right honourable friend agree with me that the last general election was not fought on how political parties might handle the coronavirus pandemic, but was categorically about ensuring that the result of the 2016 referendum was implemented in full? Will my right honourable friend confirm that that is what he intends to see happen?
Prime Minister. I can indeed, Mr. Speaker. I congratulate my right honourable friend on his new book.
And if you were to read his excellent book, Madam Deputy Speaker, Eyes and Ears, probably available in all good bookshops, you would be aware that he is the proud patron of the Conservative Animal Welfare Foundation and has devoted much of his life to campaigning on behalf of our furry friends.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome to this event. Thank you for joining. If at the end of my being interviewed you would like to ask me any questions, please put those questions in the live chat section. And if you would like to purchase the book, there is a link that you can find below. So please go to that. You can get the book from Ian Dale at Politicos. You can get it from Amazon. You can also get it direct from Lueth, the publishers. But finally, you could also get it directly from myself. I've got a number of my books in the House of Commons, and through your own Member of Parliament, if you tell them that you would like the book, I'm sure they'd be only too pleased to collect them directly from my office in the House of Commons. I hope you enjoy the evening. Well, good evening, everyone. We're in the wonderful county of Yorkshire. And tonight, I'm delighted to be joined by two of my parliamentary colleagues and friends, as much as anyone's got a friend in Westminster, Robert Goodwill and Andrea Jenkins. They're both very, very different. Their own personal stories are different. And I hope when they interview me, some of their background will come out in the remarks. But as you know, this book, I decided to write it whilst I am an MP. Majority of colleagues seem to write after they've left the place, and then they're, how can I put it, rather forthright about their colleagues. I haven't...
Don't mean Alan Duncan do, David, by any chance?
Well, the amount of times I've been called a thicko since Brexit, you know, I've got used to it now. So.
Well, I mean, there will, Robert and Andrew, there will be a sequel in the fullness of time, but, you know, I'm only halfway through my career, so I just wanted to get one out. Anyway, ladies and gentlemen, we've got Michael Parkinson, who's Robert, and Oprah Winfrey, who's Andrea. So who's going to go first with the opening question?
I'm happy to go first. Now, first of all, I'm really proud of what you're doing, David. I mean, you know, you're a passionate Brexiteer and animal rights activist, which, you know, plays closely to my heart as a vegetarian. I'm also an animal rights activist too. And just thank you for all the work that you've done in this area. And, you know, for nearly 4 decades in Parliament, I think it's truly amazing. And it's an honour to be, you know, be able to ask you some questions and grill you. So, I mean, I've looked at, you know, the overview of some of the chapters, you know, about Margaret Thatcher, scandals, backbench bills, the rise and fall of leaders, some fantastic titles here, and career politicians. I'm definitely interested in hearing something about that as well, because that does my head in as well, the amount of career politicians in politics nowadays. I always say to sort of young people, always try and get, you know, a proper job first and get life experience, so you remain in touch with real life. So I've got a few questions, if that's okay, David. I mean, you've got an extraordinary career, and I think your book really succeeds in capturing what's going on in Westminster, but doing it in your own way, telling your own story. So my first question to you really is, looking at your time as an MP, how have MPs and Parliament changed? You know, reflecting, you know, from 1983, the historic election, through to today. And in that, could you tell us a little bit about your relationship with Margaret Thatcher too, please?
Right. Well, Andrea, my goodness, MPs have changed. They've changed physically. They look different, but then, you know, 40 years ago, fashions were very different, but they've actually changed in the way they go about their business. Now, when I was first elected, and there was a big new intake, you were, because you defeated Ed Balls, didn't you, Andrew? In that
yes,
story?
that's right.
Yeah. How many new MPs were there when you were elected?
I think it was about 90 odd. It was quite a lot. Yes.
Well, we had over 100, but they were mainly men. And the House of Commons was overwhelmingly full of men, very, very few ladies. So on the Conservative side, the ladies that were elected, I can't recall that there were any in Yorkshire, but they all used to wear hats. And
so Elizabeth Peacock around at that time.
I apologise.
Yes.
Batley and Spen.
Yes, exactly.
Well,
we're going to see a by-election probably soon, you know, possibly soon. If Tracy Brabin, the Labour MP, gets the mayor, we might see a by-election, which, fingers crossed, let's hope we can win that.
Yeah, but Elizabeth was wonderful. But, you know, the few ladies we had, they all look very, very different. And the gentlemen, we were all, now Robert's not going to cringe at this because he's very smartly dressed in a suit with the tie. That was very much the order of the day. Well, of course, nowadays we've got a great number of women, which I celebrate in, but they look very different. I mean, when I think of Theresa May and how she used to dress to the way she is now, I mean, she was one of the first ladies to wear trousers. Conservative ladies didn't do that. She even, I think, wore leather trousers and different sort of stocks. Well, that was a big change. Yeah. And the sort of gentlemen who are elected now, they do look different. They're more casual in their
and I don't particularly like that. I don't know how you feel. I'm a bit of a traditionalist, to be honest with you. Yes.
Well, I am stuffy on the chairman's panel, and I support Lindsay. I think the shirt and tie, and I don't like this dressing down, but they are very different physically.
David, I can remember somebody asking Sir Alan Hazelhurst when he was Deputy Speaker if it was all right to go into the chamber not wearing a tie. And he said, yes, it's fine to go in the chamber, but you won't get called to speak. And I think that's changed now.
Well, I agree with Alan completely. And I think Eleanor was right. I know it was one of our own side, but to pull our colleague up and say, put a tie on, because, you know, we should, just as I like school uniforms, I like us to be sort of smartly dressed.
Me too, yeah.
Andrew, you asked about the sort of colleagues that are elected. I mean, many of my colleagues in 1983, they did have second jobs, but that wasn't seen as a bad thing because we put the hours in. I mean, we worked till 2, 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning. And of course, we used to start at 2:30 in the afternoon, Monday to Thursday, Prime Minister's question time, which was much, much better than it is now. I mean, sorry, I think it's absolute rubbish the way it is now. We used to have PM's questions on a Tuesday and Thursday for 15 minutes, and I thought it was far better than it was now. So I think increasingly now we have seen career politicians
I with you.
in the House, who I feel some of them haven't had a proper job.
Yes.
I really feel that strongly, but if I start to dwell on some of the things that colleagues have done, they're all going to get upset because we've got rather a lot of them. But I quite like with the last intake, we've got quite a few more military people back in now. We've got a number of lawyers, we've got a number of the professions, but we've got a number of the people who've sort of done real jobs. I like the fact that they run their own firms, whatever the firms might be. And
we've also got a lot of Northerners and outspoken Northerners. I mean, we're in Yorkshire, today, I'm a Yorkshire woman, and are you from Yorkshire, Robert? I think you are, aren't you?
We've been farming on the same farm in Yorkshire since 1850, but we were in the same village a couple hundred years before that. But they always say you can always tell a Yorkshireman, but you can't tell him much.
I love it. And look, before Robert asked the question, you asked me about Margaret Thatcher.
Yes, I did. Yes.
Now, there are just a handful of us left in the House of Commons who were there when Margaret Thatcher was not only Prime Minister, but was at her peak. I know lots of colleagues produce photographs of them with Margaret Thatcher, but tragically, her health really deteriorated. And of course, at the end, she more or less had dementia. I was very fortunate that I was there in 2 of the 3 parliaments when she was absolutely at her peak. And it was awe-inspiring. I'm not seeing it through rose-coloured glasses. She, without question, is the greatest world leader I've ever met and the greatest British Prime Minister I've ever met. So although I was obviously born before Churchill died, it's ridiculous for me to start talking about Winston Churchill because I didn't know him. Whereas Margaret, I did know extremely well. I don't know where to start. She changed our country and she changed the world, and she made them both better places in which to live. She had a vision. She told us what she believed in. She didn't sort of follow whatever was seen to be the popular way of things and then adopt that as her policy. She set out her policies and then tried to persuade people that they should vote Conservative and have her continue as our Prime Minister. So she was a visionary. She was a real proper Conservative. And all I would say, Andrea and Robert, on a personal note, when she came through the lobbies, as she did, it was as if there was some sort of aura or glow around her. And it was the little things she did, which of course never gets in the public domain. If you send David Amos a little handwritten note, I know no one does that now, they will do emails, it means a lot. She knew we were all sinners. So if you got into trouble or difficulty in your private life, health issues, lost someone you loved, a little handwritten letter would always arrive. She thought that the little things counted. And she really was in touch with people. I mean, she came into the tea room. She did all sorts of things which I value, and dare I say, I think other leaders should learn from. And without question, when she performed at the dispatch box, it was out of this world. And I think probably one of the greatest speeches I ever heard was when some of my gutless colleagues undermined her and removed her at the final moment, and I was sat with Michael Curtis just one row back from her. She should have stood at the dispatch box in that electric blue suit when Dennis Skinner intervened and said, "What a good idea. Yet I might be in charge of the European Bank," which was absolutely hilarious at the time. But she showed such bravery when she was breaking her heart. But I mean, look, the whole evening, Andrea, I could talk about Margaret Thatcher.
No, that's lovely.
What would you like to ask?
David.
Pleasure.
Well, I'd like to ask you maybe about some of the eccentrics who you shared the green benches with. I know we sort of hear of these names, Alan Clark and Nicholas Fairbairn, and I mean, do we still have eccentrics in Parliament? Which particular characters would you single out for mention? Maybe you've mentioned them in the book.
Yeah, well, look.
Are we all eccentric, wanting to be an MP?
Well, I am eccentric. We're all a bit odd, aren't we, wanting to be MPs? But look, the year I was elected, we had a bookmaker, we had all sorts of extraordinary people. Myself and a colleague who's still in the House now, we occupied an office in Abbey Gardens, 2 Abbey Gardens. And can you believe it? There were 3 desks. And one of the desks was, I'm not going to name the person, but was someone elected. It was a he. He was elected in 1983, lost his seat in 1987, and we never saw him. And the House of Commons hardly ever saw him. But I think Edwina Currie, when I stood up to make my maiden speech, and I know she's standing in the county council elections, I understand, in Derbyshire, and God, I hope she's going to win. When I got up to make my maiden speech, packed house, I followed Ted Heath on our side. In those days, maiden speeches, you didn't sort of make them one after another and throw them away, because the only time people listen to you and don't interrupt you is when you make your maiden speech. So I did it on the rate capping bill. And I got up, Bernard Wetherall was the speaker, and I said, Mr. Speaker, it is a great honour for me to address the House of Commons for the first time. And by the way, my speech had been written by John Major, who was my whip. We sat down together and did the speech together. But as I stood up and said those words, and you can imagine Andrea and Robert, it was quite awe-inspiring. Edwina Currie, who was sitting near me, looked at me, he said, and about time too. the whole, because I was among the last group of MPs to speak, because I've been waiting for this rate capping bill that was eventually called the poll tax. Well, if you'd have told me I'd have become Edwina's PPS later on, and we really had a good relationship together, I would never have believed it. But she was an eccentric, probably still is now, a real eccentric. And I'm not just talking about salmonella and the eggs, but I mean, I'm sure you could remember in those days when newspapers really counted, and she made those remarks saying that if elderly people wanted to stay warm, that they should all knit woolly hats and jumpers. And of course, the opposition will...
Yeah, or buy them at jumble sales, I think she said as well, which when I was full-time farming, I used to buy a lot of jumbers at jumble sales so I could discard them around the farm. I've got to say, on Edwina Currie, I was candidate in Northwest Leicestershire in the 1997 election, very close to her seat. And she went on the national media on the Sunday before polling day and basically said out loud what we all suspected, we're going to lose and lose badly. And I've never really forgiven her for that, because at that point, all my workers just gave up and didn't come out again. So it was, we were all thinking it, but we were all just trying to, 3 more days of campaigning. Let's just get it over with. We knew Blair was going to be the Prime Minister, but at least let's put up a good fight. But sadly, Edwina said it out loud, and pretty much we all became quite demoralised.
Well, she did have a habit of doing that. Let's not mince words, but she didn't need a PR company. She just opened her mouth and she got the message across. Extraordinary. And I can always remember, perhaps I'm going too far, but I did have a private conversation when she was offered a job. Now, I better not say what it was, but the then Prime Minister offered her a particular job and she turned it down. She said, David, I won't be any good at it. So that's the truth. And she left government as a result of it. But more characters before I come on to the present one. I mean, Neil Hamilton, he was absolutely fantastic. I don't know if you remember that speech at the party conference about bureaucracy. And then
I met Neil, David, with my mum and dad.
And he was showing pile after pile of these things, absolutely fantastic guy. And Geoffrey Dickens, who I do mention in the book. You see, people used to laugh at Geoffrey Dickens. I mean, they probably laugh about me, but every time he got up and spoke about paedophilia and other things, of course, he was absolutely right about it all. You know, all these individuals that he was complaining about, he was right about. Harry Greenaway, who was a good friend of mine, an Ealing MP, he was seen as eccentric. Rhodes Boyson with his long sideburns. I don't know if you remember him. He was
absolutely education
and Northern Ireland. He was eccentric, but you know, it was Rhodes Boyson who gave me this tip. He said, David, when you go to a function, lunch or dinner, don't just sit there and chat to people either side. During each course, quickly go around all the tables. And I always have, and I still manage to have my meal. Absolutely marvellous. Janet Fuchs is in the House of Lords, Dame Janet Fuchs. I mean, she and Andrew, she's a big animal lover.
I know Janet very well. Yes, well, she's a big gardener.
Oh, and absolutely, wonderful lady. But you know, she was probably seen as a bit eccentric, and I can remember the Scottish member of Parliament, Nicky Fairbairn, who was definitely
tartan trousers.
Yeah, I mean, it was one of Elaine Kellett Bowman. She used to turn up the night before the budget with a sleeping bag, and would sleep at the door. You know the doors that are closed at the state opening part. She would sleep there. Always wanted to be first in the queue, and she always wore this little brooch. And the brooch was a picture of the child she lost. I mean, she was an extraordinary. Oh. So many real characters. You know, I could talk about Ken Clark.
David, maybe your claim to notoriety, if not eccentricity, would be the adjournment debates before the summer and before Christmas, when you rattle through a long list. I mean, it's your next 20 press releases basically condensed into 3 minutes. I mean, you know, I don't think anyone else quite does it with the same aplomb and character as you. But I mean, when did that start? Is that a recent thing?
Oh, well, you see that there are a little team of us, really. John Randall in the Lords and Patrick McLaughlin in the Lords now. And I've always spoken in the end of term adjournment debates, because you can talk about anything. And if you've got a break, you know, Parliament isn't sitting for...
You talk about everything, not anything. You talk about everything.
I get my points across, but I've done it for years. And the state opening of Parliament, I always speak on the first day of it. But Robert, Andrew, coming on to present day eccentrics, although we don't, let's be frank, I mean, this has been a joke of a Parliament because of coronavirus, and we haven't been there in person, really. I can't wait until we get back in person. So I think the 2019 people have had a tough time.
Yeah, I completely agree.
I have identified a few people who have got the makings of real eccentrics, my goodness. But I'm not going to mention who they are.
Will you mention it at the end when we're not hearing?
But we've got some real eccentrics, and Robert and Andrea, I just hope and pray that our whips are giving them some advice and reining one or two of them in, because, you know, they haven't been having a good introduction to Parliament, really. And, you know, nearly 2 years has gone by, and a few of them might have gone into bad ways, really. And that's a bit tough, but there are, without question, eccentrics. Finally, before I allow Andrea to ask me a question, there are older eccentrics who are quite in the news at the moment, and they often appear on TV, and the media love them, and they do sort of say extraordinary things. But again, I'm not going to mention them because they are still you're both smiling.
They're usually wheeled out when the knife needs to be stuck in. Let's face it, yes. Yeah,
I'm very straightforward. But by the way, I haven't got a cold. This is the start of my hay fever. Can't do anything about it. But I don't want to produce a House of Commons full of bores,
Completely
identity.
agree.
So I think it's good to have colourful characters, but I do think on occasions colleagues should think before they say things, because it does an awful lot of damage. And the final thing I'm going to say before I shut up.
I wish you'd have given me that advice a few years ago.
Well, I do grimace when I see one or two colleagues in Portcullis House with one or two journalists. Now, they're not really there at the moment. And I think, oh my goodness, they're pretending to be your friend and they're not. And it's all going to be in the newspapers. And it might not have national traction.
Yeah.
But between all of us, it can be quite helpful. And
yeah,
I
think my trouble, David, is actually just saying it, you know, whether it's on social media, saying what I think and being too honest. You can make a few enemies in Parliament, can't you, for being too honest? You
can, because look, we're all two-faced. You know, with some people, that they're your best friends, and as soon as you turn your back, there's a knife in your back, and they're sort of running you down to the next colleague. I used to get very, very offended and upset about all this when I first started. Oh, I'm not now. You know, I don't expect anything of anyone. Well, I'm sort of hardened
yes.
to it, really. But I do slightly, Robert and Andrea, worry about the fact that we've got a lot of new colleagues, over 100. And I do think they need to be careful, and particularly it's about trust among each other. And if
maybe someone like yourself, David, speaking to them, who's been, you know, in this time,
I'm sorry, I'm pretty ruthless. I don't give them a second chance, really.
Yeah,
I don't. But Andrea, over to you with your next question.
Okay, thank you. One of your chapters is about the party system. Again, how has that changed? And what was campaigning like, you know, when you first started? How has it changed now? And how would you like to see the party system change in the future?
Right. Well, political parties, when I first started, you know, I've been a member now for over 50 years. The Conservatives were being really stereotyped as being just for the wealthy, having lots of money, and Labour were all for the working class, and obviously had the backing.
Labour still pull that card today, don't they?
Well, I mean, what a joke!
Northern Heartlands.
What a joke! And it all went downhill with the most. Oh, don't start me on Tony Blair. But having been there with Tony Blair and Gordon Brown on the day they were first elected, I could write books really about Tony Blair and his brand. So all that has gone, and I really do rejoice that we've got so many. I'm working class, my children being brought up comfortably off middle class, but I do rejoice at the fact that we now have so many working class colleagues, and of course we should reflect the general population. But to go back to my remarks about Margaret Thatcher, Labour just really want to pick and choose, get on to what's popular. The hypocrisy really about wealth creation, I don't know where to start with, because we're all capitalists, frankly. I'm not saying that we're getting like the Democrats and Republic in America, but it has changed and we've become muddied, really. So you asked me a direct question, Andrea. I want our party, I hope somewhere we've got a think tank, as Margaret Thatcher did have. I hope we've got some really clever people who are thinking of a whole set of policies and beliefs on what we can campaign in the future. I know it's old hat when I first started, sale of council houses, selling shares, you know, any number of things which Margaret sort of through regenerating Docklands and all these sort of things. I know we're coming up with free ports, but I think it's very important that our party is working on some very distinctive policies, and that we're not just sort of shadowing what Labour come out with and all of that. But the way our party is run, Andrea, oh God, I don't want to be critical, but I do have some concerns. campaigning used to be much more fun than it is now. I like a bit of razzmatazz. I mean, does that not go down well in Yorkshire? Do you not do razzmatazz there? Is it all?
Well, we have fun on the campaign trail. So, yeah. So,
well, going back to my first parliamentary election in 1979 in the London Borough of Newham, which has always had 100% Labour council and 100% Labour MPs, it didn't stop me having a cavalcade led by Miss Bluebell. And we really socked it to people, because you were a former beauty queen, weren't you, Andrea?
Oh my God, let's not get there. my dad sent my picture off to Miss UK when I was younger. And,
well, when you think Eric Morley nearly won Dulwich for the Conservative Party.
Oh really? I didn't know that.
Yeah, he came. It was just 3 figures, I think, about 200 votes. Yeah, really, very, very nearly what one.
Can I ask you a personal question?
Yeah.
What do you think of this whole politically correct woke agenda? I mean, I find it irksome, to be honest. And I think we should be the party of meritocracy. We should be a country of meritocracy. Absolutely. And so, yeah, and it doesn't play damn well in these northern seats. I'm sure you'd agree, Robert. But I think that if people are struggling, on a daily basis to pay the bills and live, they don't care whether they've got a male, female, whatever background elected, as long as that person's effective.
So I went on the course, by the way, David. This, we all have to go on this course.
So did I.
Yeah. We were told that you can't call a woman under the age of, I think, 16 or whatever a girl. And I sort of cheekily asked, well, can we call them lasses? Because up our way, it's lads and lasses. And they said certainly not. So pretty much everybody in Yorkshire I know is not.
It's a lad or a lass, isn't it?
Because they're all a lad or a lass. And
I so agree.
Crazy.
Yeah. This is music to my ears. So, Andrea, I was in despair when we had all these, female lists and just picking people for the sake of it and shooing them in. I know some good things.
Well, I think we should have a bring a bloke to work day, actually. I mean, in all seriousness, it's white working class boys who are behind educationally, more likely to suffer mental health issues. And I think that really, it should be a meritocracy policies that's right for everyone. We shouldn't be, focusing on certain groups as a society, really.
And Andrea, boys are lazier. You have to really push them. But I hated that stage where we went through that our party nationally sort of shaped things. And although, do you both go to the party conferences?
Yes, I do. Yeah.
Yeah,
I usually go to a lot of the fringe events. Yeah, I usually, speak at a lot of fringe events.
I used to religiously go to Brighton and Blackpool and all that. And then, of course, I decided to have it in Manchester and Birmingham. Then when the Brighton bombing took place, we didn't go there. But my goodness, the party conferences have changed, and not in a good way, really. Let's find some of our front benchers to make decent speeches, not sitting on a blooming stall like Val Dunican and having a chat in a sofa and all that. I want to go back to the days when, dare I say, Michael Heseltine, Leon Britton, Ken Clark had me standing up because I was motivated by them, and Margaret did. I want to get the power of oratory back again. Not everyone just sort of sitting down there in a sort of tame question and answer thing. I can even go back, I'm afraid, to when Enoch Power was a member of our party, and that was electric, and he had rows with Ted Heath, wonderful. So I don't really rate party conferences now. I think they're a complete waste of time. We could get the whole thing over in a weekend, frankly, and it's all about the people having stalls outside. So I don't like that anymore. You're probably thinking, oh, thank God we haven't got Amos anywhere near the organisation of our party. But I think there's a happy medium. I don't like that. And I don't understand why we have 2 party chairmen now. We used to have 1 party chairman. How does that work? You should only have 1 boss, really. And we seem to have huge numbers of deputies and all of that. I don't know. Where are our agents? Do we not need agents anymore? I
think they're called campaign managers now, aren't they? New titles. Yeah.
Well, I think it's a bit of a sham, but I think it was a huge mistake when we left 32 Smith Square. I thought that was a wonderful venue. And then as soon as we went down into Victoria Street to that place, and then we're sort of round the corner, aren't we now, right by the Royal Courts by the Supreme Court. And I look, no one's going to listen to me because we've got a great general election result. But I know why we got a great general election result. It was because the opposition were absolutely useless and the British people wanted that referendum result carried out. That's why I feel we got a fantastic result. That's
although our Prime Minister Boris does go down well on the doorstep as well, up north.
Yeah.
Definitely.
Yeah. So I think that looking to elections in the future, which aren't going to be about Brexit, because Andrea, I thought having that election on the 12th of December 2019 was a huge mistake. I thought to have an election 2 weeks before Christmas, what on earth are they playing it? And I hated every minute of it. But how wrong was I? I'm just saying that I don't think we're going to have a general election like that. And I want both of you understand the red wall, which I don't understand. We can't let the people down. We've got to deliver. We've really got to deliver. We can't, not like Labour, who've had MPs for sort of 20, 30 years saying, oh, well, isn't it a dump your air and it's a slum and aren't things terrible? They want an MP who's going to change it, turn their lives around and deliver what Margaret Thatcher did, that every person, regardless of the way or the family they've been brought into, should be given the opportunity to make the most of their lives. And that's what I believe in as a Conservative. So, yes. Robert.
I wonder if I'd ask you about this one. I mean, I'm in Portcullis House, just across the road. If the blinds weren't shut for this filming, you'd be able to see Big Ben or the scaffolding surrounding Big Ben. But obviously, whilst the Victorians built this building quite well, after the Germans had demolished it in the war, I think the post-war generation didn't rebuild it, and the building, I'm told, fires break out, rain comes in. The fabric of the building's in a very bad state. And I see in your book you've got a section on restoration and renewal. So what is your master plan for this building? Should we try and stay in it? Should we
Robert, I shouldn't be in love with the building, but I am. And I think to work in the Palace of Westminster, it's the greatest parliament in the world, and I absolutely love it. But having been on the administration committee and gone up to the top of Big Ben, which I was against refurbishment, I was wrong about that. The water was literally pouring in through the top, doing huge damage. And not being funny, I doubt if either of you have been MPs when we used to have a very, very thin chap who literally had the key to the door, and he used to take parties up and down. He was the guide. But I think, the idea that you would take parties up and there's no lift now if someone becomes unwell is a complete no-no. So I was wrong about restoring Big Ben. I think it's going to be wonderful when it's completed. Also, I've been all around the building on the roof and seen at first-hand the damage done. A lot of repair work needs to be done there, and I've seen all the dangerous electrical installations below. So I don't have to be convinced that it's got to be restored, but no way do I support the initial plans where we move out for 10 years, have this ridiculous property being built at 79 Whitehall, because I was there with Edwina Currie when that new Department of Health was first opened. We had Nick Scott there and we had Norman Fowler as the Secretary of State. And the idea that we can now turn that building into the Palace of Westminster, crazy. Because my view is that there are some colleagues, neither of you, I think, who don't like the building, think we should be working in a modern building. They think it's ridiculous that we go through the lobbies. They think it's silly that we sit either side. We should all have a set place, speaker-elect and all that. They want to get us out. And they want that to sort of be owned by English Heritage or something and just be used as a visitor attraction.
I've been there and done that. I was in the European Parliament for 5 years, and you have a hemicycle that will seat 700 people, and it's weird if you're in there late at night with only 4 people in there, and because you have to sit in your place, you're sort of miles away from anywhere else. And this place is fantastic. I'm sure you agree that Churchill was absolutely right when they rebuilt it, that they kept it small enough to be intimate. And understood that it wouldn't be necessary to have a seat for everyone.
Absolutely, with the white lines being 2.5 sword lengths apart. I love all those traditions. So I am part of the group of people who think, yes, let's restore it, but we shouldn't move out. We could do it in part. I don't believe the costings. And hey, if anyone's got to move out, then it should be the unelected members of the House of Lords and all of that. So we've got to keep the building. And I think Lindsay is very subtly doing a pretty good job, because it seems to me that the restoration work is already going on at the moment. That's
a question as well, David. Robert said his office is in Portcullis House. Mine's in Normanshire North. The occupant prior to me, it was George Galloway's office, and I'm always fascinated with people's offices and the history. Have you changed offices much these last 40 years?
I have. Now, don't take offence at this, Andrea. I don't like Normanshire South or North. They remind me of old-fashioned urinals.
The offices are good sizes. I like the size.
They're very big, but you see, I go back to the time when Robert wasn't sitting where he is now, but these buildings were occupied by the BBC and other organisations above Westminster Tube, and it's just out of the world. It's all been transformed. So when I started, we didn't have individual offices. We had a lady who was a miss, who was in charge, very much a miss. She was over 6 foot. Everyone was frightened of her. Eventually her name would come back to me. And she was responsible, not Robert like the whips are now, she was responsible for allocating the rooms. And everyone was frightened of her. So what happened, I and 2 other colleagues were sent to Abbey Gardens. We absolutely loved it, actually, because Westminster School, 2 times a year, the Queen would come there. They'd have lovely garden parties. You're a farmer, Robert. You know that the National Farmers Union always has, or used to have, a wonderful gathering there every year. So it was Harry Greenaway who said to me, David, I'm leaving. There's a broom cupboard there. Why don't you ask them to fit it out and make it into a room, which I did. So after having a shared office in Abbey Gardens, I went to the broom cupboard, again in the same building, and that overlooked the house when Margaret was removed as Prime Minister. She had Lord McAlpine's shared property there right opposite. So I spent many, many happy times there. And then, Andrea, wow, 1 Parliament Street was the first to be opened. So I was one of the first occupants of 1 Parliament Street. And Prince Charles, you can see the plaque there, came and opened it with Michael Heseltine. I love the building, and I've been there ever since. And I am the only person remaining there. I don't think either of you were colleagues of Derek Conway, were you, when he was an MP?
Derek Conway telephoned me shortly after my election and threatened me that if I didn't vote for David Davis when he stood against David Cameron, that it wouldn't be good for me in the future because David Davis was going to win and my career would be finished before it even started. And I didn't like that very much. So that's the only conversation I've had with Mr. Conway, when he rang me and threatened me, and I basically gave him short shrift.
I was in the David Davis camp, But I got it wrong about David.
I would have been if David had rung me himself and said, "Would you like to come on my team?" I'd have jumped at the chance. But I didn't like being threatened.
Well, I quite agree with you. This is a side of Derek I didn't see. I was quite friendly with him. Well, he was much more forceful than I was. So he said to me, "David, we've got rubbishy offices. We're not going to wait for this woman that we're frightened of to allocate us an office. So we're just going to occupy 2 offices in one Parliament Street." So he took the best office and I took one which wasn't quite so good, but it worked. They never got us out. And the reason I've got such a great office, I mean, for a while, the office that I did have, I've been on the 3rd and 4th floor. I inherited it from Eric Forth, who was a fantastic colleague, much missing. Yeah. And then Boris Johnson took the office over. But the reason I've got such a wonderful office now overlooking Westminster Square is because it was occupied by my friend Anne Widdicombe, and she insisted. Mark Francois was the chap in charge of office accommodation. He didn't need much persuasion. She insisted that I had the office. So that's how I got it. And I don't understand, Andrea, why these offices are so sought after in the main palace. I think that most of them are horrible. You haven't got any light. They're small and pokey. And frankly, it's quite nice to get a little way away, but not too far away. You can still get there in the eight minutes. So, but I hear colleagues now, they demand everything. They demand the very best for not only themselves, but for the staff. And so I'm just grateful, really, for the journey that I've been on, really, because when I started, there was my secretary on a golf ball typewriter. There weren't computers or anything. And I think by and large now, the facilities we have are pretty good, but I'm probably in a minority. But having started from absolutely nothing, I'm very grateful for the facilities.
I've got one little question before we hand to Robert. What's your most memorable dressing down, whether it's from the whips or prime ministers or ministers? Because you're quite a free thinker, David. I'm sure there's been plenty.
Well, look, David Lightbourne, Robert knows about this one. Okay, well, he wasn't as, but I should have mentioned, by the way, Cyril Smith as well, who just unbelievable. But David Lightbourne was a huge guy, and when we were going through the nightmare during John Major's years towards the end, he literally did really have a go at someone, and it was quite intense, really, the way the whips were with colleagues. I was going to vote against the government measure because I suppose this was early in my years, and I never did vote much against them. And Richard Ryder, who's now in the House of Lords, was the chief whip. All I'm saying is he persuaded me not to. And then this is sickening, Andrea. Then I became a PPS. So they thought, oh dear, there's a little hint of rebellion there. Well, of course, now I don't touch my forelock to anyone. I don't need anything from anyone, really. So I'm in the wonderful position of being a free thinker, but I don't want to do anything to damage our party and damage our colleagues. I never air dirty linen in public. If I've got anything to say to someone, I'll sort of say it to their face, not behind their back or with a journalist. But yeah, Margaret never told me off. I'm trying to think, was there really, it'll come to me afterwards. It was actually from Anne Widdicombe, but let's not talk. Let's not talk about that, because she was running for an office and she gave me a bit of a dressing down, but we're the best of friends. Robert, I know our session is drawing to a conclusion and we're going to talk about charities, but would you like to ask me one final question about that?
Yeah, I mean, you've touched on colleagues who've gone to a better place, if the House of Lords could be described the other place. Do you think it's fit for purpose? Do you think it needs reform? Should it be elected in part, in full? You know, is the House of Lords overdue for reform, or should we leave it as it is?
I've got a huge number of friends in the House of Lords just because I've been in Parliament a long time, and of course it's full of former members of Parliament who belong to all the different parties, and I keep my links with them. But I would blame Tony Blair. Well, I blame Tony Blair for so many things. The way devolution hasn't worked during the pandemic. But he messed up the House of Lords by being vindictive to the hereditaries, and he didn't put in place an alternative system. And we struggled ever since. It is ludicrous, the number of peers we have. Absolutely crazy. I mean, there shouldn't be, I think it's 800 or something.
They're nearly all voting now because they can do it remotely on their phones.
Yeah,
so
yeah.
You don't even have to go there to participate.
And Robert, I always defended the peers because I said they had the luxury of not representing constituents, so they didn't have to worry if what they were saying was upsetting them. And they came from a whole diverse range of backgrounds, which brought an awful lot of good things to the table, really. And I think it's been messed up completely. And you're better to judge it, Robert, because you've been the European Member of Parliament and you know much more about the list system than I do. But somehow Lord Fowler, tried so hard to get the numbers down by encouraging people to retire. But that's all gone wrong now because there are so many new peers being appointed all the time. And I think that the way they've begun to flex their muscles against the House of Commons is not acceptable. And yet I am going to say this, there's too many Liberals. This is ridiculous. There are 11 Liberal members of Parliament, whereas in the House of Lords, there are any number of them. It's absolutely crazy. So I want our leader at the next general election to have reform of the House of Lords in our manifesto. I know it doesn't resonate on the doorstep, but I think it's so important.
I agree. I think that the regions are poorly represented. I mean, there are some very good peers who are from the regions, but generally London is overrepresented in the Lords. Even people who maybe have been members of Parliament for constituencies around the country tend to sort of base themselves in London, many of them. And I think that the place like Yorkshire need more representatives.
Absolutely.
In the Lords. And I think by all means, let's elect them under some list system, some regional system, but then maybe for 15 years by rotation. And that way they wouldn't have to worry about re-election.
Now, I've changed my views on it completely. I'm with you, Robert. So look, before we talk about the charities, Andrea, a tiny little final question from you.
Sorry if I was distracted. I need to let the whips know how, for my proxy vote, how I want them to vote on this next thing that's going through. So I'm just sending a text.
Yeah, I did.
Well, we can't go through this interview, David, without touching on Brexit. What's your most memorable moment during, the last few years?
Is this to upset Robert, Andrea?
You won't upset me. I mean, I got the result straight. I mean, I personally voted to stay, but I did it mainly out of loyalty to Mr. Cameron. And as a farmer, I get far too much money funneled at me by the European Union. But as soon as the result came through, I accepted the results. And let's do it.
You did, Robert, to be fair.
And that's what, if the Labour Party had done that, they would have been in a much better place than they are now, I've got to say.
Oh, absolutely. Well, you see, Robert and I are on the same page as this. I'm old enough to have voted in the first referendum, where we were slaughtered 3-1, but I accepted the result. I never, Robert and Andrea, thought we'd have a chance to vote again on our membership of the European Union. And I do thank David Cameron for that. I thought he dominated the House of Commons and was a great leader. And I thought he and George Osborne left the House of Commons far too early, really. A great tragedy.
Yeah,
but Andrea, I thought that though that Parliament was absolutely dreadful.
Yeah,
absolutely
completely agree.
dreadful. And that's why I did this little diary on Brexit, because going backwards and forwards, being slaughtered in the votes, it was very unpleasant between colleagues. Let's be frank about it. And I was just shocked.
Relationships still haven't recovered. I know there's certain people who still will not speak to me during,
but
that
you,
time. Yes.
The three of us know every vote counts. If huge turnout, and if there had just been one vote, then we should have honoured it, really. But they wanted to keep revisiting it. And I thought it was just awful when we had to exclude a number of our colleagues from the whip, the other party being set up, the Supreme Court it was absolutely miserable. And I think that, okay, we didn't bargain for the pandemic, but I think we're in a good place. Thank God we didn't sign up for the European vaccination programme. And I think it'll only be probably when I'm dead and buried that we'll find out whether we made the right decision. I feel we did, and I think we're going to benefit from it. Now, ladies and gentlemen, this book, any royalties go to my three selected charities. So I think, Andrew, you wanted to ask me about endometriosis.
Yes, yeah, absolutely.
So I didn't know anything about this condition, which affects so many women. And it was a constituent who was suffering from endometriosis. Although I've got a son and 4 daughters, I don't think we were aware of the condition. And she poured her heart out to me. And I'm just so proud of all that she's done now. And we've even got it being talked about nationally. The government a few weeks ago have got it in their health program. So I'm really pleased about that. And I think, Robert, you wanted to ask me about prostate.
Yes, I mean, I think prostate cancer does have quite a high level of awareness. I mean, the fact that sticks in my mind about prostate cancer is more people die with it than of it, but a lot of people do die of it.
Yeah. Well, again, Robert, I was inspired by a local constituent who had gene therapy. He had prostate cancer and recovered from it. And that's why some of the money is going to that charity. And both of you will have constituents with learning difficulties. So the Music Man project, which is just inspirational. I hope one day you will have your own organizations in your 2 constituencies. But this deputy head teacher and his wife, who are both members of the Salvation Army, David Stanley, gave up teaching, and through the power of music, he's absolutely transformed the lives of people with learning difficulties. A network is spreading throughout the country and in overseas as well. We played at the London Palladium. I did my Bruce Forsyth act there. We played at the Royal Albert Hall, which was just fantastic. And we're going to go to Broadway, probably to Carnegie Hall once the pandemic is over. So, ladies and gentlemen, the book, Eyes and Ears, A Survivor's Guide to Westminster. Please buy it, because if you do, all the royalties go to the 3 charities. And I want to thank Andrea and Robert for the time that you've spent this evening in interviewing me. It's been so good to touch base with a couple of Northern colleagues. So I know you were interviewing me, but I've actually learnt a good deal myself this evening. So thank you, Andrea, for all that you did with Brexit, but particularly with animal welfare. My next book, by the way, is about animals, for the love of animals.
Excellent.
And Robert, thank you for all that you did in flying the flag in the European Parliament and then bringing your expertise over to Westminster. You were a wonderful minister who got things done and a first-class whips. And I know your star will continue to rise.
Thank you. I'll leave you with one comment that as a non-Yorkshireman you'll probably appreciate, which is you should never ask anyone if they're from Yorkshire, because if they are, they're bound to tell you in the first 5 minutes. And if not, why humiliate them unnecessarily?
Well, on that note, ladies and gentlemen, I think the 3 of us want to say good night.
And best of luck,
Good night.
David. Thank you.
Good night.
Thank you. Good night, everyone. This is my journey so far. Where I was born, where I became a councillor, when I was first elected to Parliament, and where I am now the Member of Parliament for. Enjoy my journey. I hope you enjoy reading my book, Eyes and Ears, A Survivor's Guide to Westminster.